Hi, everybody. Welcome to New Creations for Christ. My name is Kimberly Dotson, and I'm here to share my testimony with everyone today, just about my lifestyle of alcohol, drugs, and crime, and my pain that led me to my spiritual bankruptcy, to my surrender, and God's gracious redemption of my life. So, I was born into a very dysfunctional family lifestyle. Since I started being abused around the age of 8, 9 years old, and just being very misled, and started, I started everything at a young, I started smoking cigarettes at a very young age, started rebelling around that time, around 10 years old. And at 13, I tried alcohol and marijuana for the first time, and I loved it. It was finally a release of the way I've felt about myself the last few years, feeling like very displaced and unwanted and rejected. And alcohol and drugs helped me to deal with that. And at first it was great. It was a good time. It was a release. It gave me a connection to people that I didn't have. I didn't have at home, and I didn't have anywhere else. And once I started, I had this instant, yearning for more. And so I began running away from home at about 13, 14 years old, and just seeking, a very adventurous lifestyle at a young age, anything to get me away from the environment that I was living in at that time, anywhere that I could feel accepted, connected, or loved elsewhere than my home. And eventually, that molded me into a lot of criminal behaviors. So I started drinking and marijuana as a teenager, tried cocaine, and at around 16. And for a long time, it was a weekend thing. And then next thing I know, I'm failing in school, and I was doing these things that, but everything at that time, it just felt right. You don't know until you know. And at that time, I was still really ignorant, and thought I knew everything. And so I started skipping school. And I'm from a small town, California, Kentucky, where, everyone knows everything about everybody. And I wanted to break away from that. And I thought the only way to get away from that was to continue to run away. And so I started to go to school, and I would leave and go in because we didn't have buses where I was from. So I would go in the front door of school, and I would leave out the back and get on the city bus. And eventually found my way to Cincinnati, and I loved it. I loved the city feel. I loved the adventurous lifestyle, the risk-taking, the people that it brought into my life, and the way it made me feel so independent. And I thought I was standing on my own 2 feet. And for once, I thought that I could have the life that I always wanted, that I always dreamt about. And drugs and alcohol started to make me feel like I could have that. And so I started to try to find that in so many things: drugs, alcohol, men, whatever, anything that would fill that void of rejection, that void of, unworthiness, and that I'm not good enough feeling, anything that could fill that hole, this life-size hole that I carried with me that I didn't even know I had. So eventually, as I kept running away, I finally dropped out of high school after missing so many days, and got a job, and started to set off to try to take care of myself and become this independent woman and break free from this, dysfunctional lifestyle that I was raised in for a very long time, that, had become very normal to me. And I thought, well, if I can just take the things that I do know and get out on my own and venture out on my own, that I can at least try to make a decent life for myself. And that was always my goal, until, the behaviors started to spiral out of control. It was like, it stopped being fun around my mid-20s, when heroin came into the picture. It started, of course, it escalated from the weed and the alcohol to the cocaine, and then to the prescription pills. And, and that went hand in hand with that, looking for something to fix me, all the time, because I thought I needed something to fix me, whether that was a prescription from a doctor or a relationship or a man, looking here in this world for something to save me from myself, something to fix me. And I was on a mission to find what that thing was. And that led me into the arms of heroin. And, heroin did its job. However, I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I initially tried it for the first time. But it took away the pain. It took me to a place of darkness that only those who have done it or had those places of darkness can describe. It's such a zombified feeling that you become so physically dependent on it that all of a sudden you're okay living empty in this broken, exhausted, pain-filled, traumatic world. And all of a sudden you become okay with being a zombie, just existing. And you end up into this vicious cycle. I ended up into this vicious cycle of living to use and using to live. And I was, I was at my rock bottom. I mean, they say you only hit rock bottom when you stop digging. I was at my rock bottom. I had been on the streets of downtown Cincinnati for probably the past 4 years that I lost my children, and I was sleeping in front of stores and alleyways and trap houses and abandoned buildings. At this time, I had multiple misdemeanors, multiple felonies. I had overdosed 9 times, got thrown out of a car, ran over top of, and lived. Every time I would wake up and and I'm like, what is going on? Just let me die. And I would go to the worst of worst places. So we have a lot of places in downtown that we call like the ruins and Tent City, and places where a lot of homeless addicts live, and have really gotten comfortable there. And so there were places I would go to that I just didn't understand how anyone found me. There was a dumpster area that I used to go to do my dope, and there was an old mattress down there, and like every time they found me down there. Like, there was this one building I was in, with this trap house, and we would go in to buy our dope, and then, we weren't supposed to do it in the building, but we would sneak all the way down to the basement, and the doors had big, huge iron doors on them, and they would lock so that, we knew the police or no one could get in. And I would sneak down to the basement, and I would do my dope down there, and I would always push myself to do as much as I could because I wanted it to be my last. Death would have been easy compared to looking at myself and who I become, living with myself every day. I was tired. I didn't want to keep going anymore. I wanted to quit, and I didn't know how. I'd never been taught anything else. I'd never had any other options. I'd never even been told it was an option for me. I'd heard counselors and I'd heard treatment center people, and they'd given me tools, and I was smart, and I would learn, and I would listen, and then I would get out and I would do the same thing because I lacked the self-discipline. I lacked the confidence in myself. I lacked the support. I would get these bouts of dry time in jail, and then I would get out and have nothing or no one to come home to. So what do? I go back to the block. That's what I knew. That's all I knew to do, was what I've always done. And therefore I got what I always get. And when I went to the bottom of this basement, I just knew this was going to be my last. And I'll never forget, it was on Super Bowl Sunday. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up, and there's a string around my arm, and police are all around me, and fire department, and they're like, I guess you don't like the Seahawks, and I'm like, what? And like, I'm so delirious, and I'm thinking, how did they get in here? Like, how did this happen? And so I go to the hospital, and they Narcan me, and I'm okay, and I'm alive once again. And I'm thinking, what? I've lost my brother. I lost my brother 4 years ago to a heroin overdose. I've lost so many friends, so many great people to overdoses. And I'm like, God just wouldn't let me go, and I knew, I didn't really know that it was him, but I knew it was him, and the last time that I overdosed, I ended up and getting sober for a little while. I'd managed to patch a couple of months together, and, and not in full surrender, just trying to put one foot in front of the other and do whatever I could to not use, whether that meant abusing some sort of prescription medication or, drinking on the weekends or whatever I could do to not have to sit on my hands because I couldn't get free. It was like, I was as sober as I could be, that was my season. That was all I had. And that was enough. That was enough for God to start getting in there and ironing out some kinks and bringing me to the end of myself. Well, I ended up relapsing shortly after I'd patched a few months together, because I'm a God bargainer. I get those prayers going that says, Lord, if you get me out of this, Lord, if you give me my kids back, Lord, if you give me a good place to live, Lord, if I had some good friends, Lord, if I had a different family, this wouldn't have happened. I love to bargain and try to hustle God, because that's my nature. And it's my nature to always try to get something, in return for. I don't sacrifice willingly. I mean, who does? I didn't know that was like a thing of the flesh that I had to allow God to surrender in me. I didn't know that was something that I had to offer up. I thought, I give you something, you give me something. Like that's what I knew. That's what I was learned. That's what I was taught. That's what I learned. And after I relapsed, I went out like a champ. I was like out there in the streets and sleeping in the alleys and in front of stores. And, I had gotten robbed and beat to death in the head, had 13 broken bones in my face, left for dead. And I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. And they're like, who did this to you? And all I could think was pulling the IVs out of my arm and getting out of there, because of course I'm a wanted fugitive. And I'm like, I gotta go, and here I'm looking like the hunchback of Notre Dame trying to get out of the hospital. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, who am I? Like, I don't even know. And all of these things, all of these crazy, ugly, broken things happen to me. And you know what? I thought, I deserve it. I deserve it. For the first time, God allowed me to see myself through sober eyes. And I didn't like what I saw. And I didn't know who I was or who I was supposed to be, but I knew I was not supposed to be that. And I knew right then at that moment that everything I represented, everything I thought I was a lie. I was not strong. I was not independent, and I was not free. I was not winning. They were winning. The enemy was winning. The system was winning. The drugs were winning. I was a puppet. I was a puppet. And I knew right then and there that I was going to give it everything I had. And I think right then when I finally started praying to God, and I said, God, I got nothing left. I got nothing left, but I got my heart. And if you'll do your part, I'll do mine. And you show me. If you're there and you care, you show me who you are. And I challenged him. And he did just that. And I remember it was so clear, God's voice, he was like, I am with you. I am with you. And I'm like, well, send me some help because I don't know what to do. And he gave me one instruction: start over. That's all I heard. Start over. And I'm like, start over? What does this mean? And I set out and I started, going to those meetings while I was in jail. I didn't wait till I got out to start working on myself and trying to get close and get real with God. I started doing it while I was in there. I started changing my behaviors. I stopped hustling in jail. I stopped trying to manipulate others in jail. I started respecting authority in jail. I started doing those things, walking honestly, praying in jail, not asking, but giving in jail, trying to be that person, because I had came to a point where I'd been in there for like 9-10 months at that time. I hadn't received a letter or a visit. And I thought either my family thinks I'm dead or they don't care. And I heard God clear as day say, if you don't care, nobody ever will. And I heard that. I heard that. I heard that so clear in my soul that every time a worldly thought comes into my mind, I have to remember who I'm fighting for. And so I started those things there. And, moving out, coming out, I had heard about, Reset Ministries and from a girl in jail that was trying to get there. And I'm like, never heard of them. Don't know anything about any faith-based, sober living, anything. And I knew God wanted me to go somewhere faith-based. But I figured it was treatment again, but in my heart of hearts, I knew I didn't need treatment. I knew I had the tools. I knew what to do. I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to surrender. I didn't know how to be a lady. I didn't have any self-discipline. I didn't have anyone to learn any new behaviors from. And so I prayed and I met this lady at one of the meetings that I went to, and I went up and God was like, get her phone number. And I'm like, okay. And all of this redemption of my life has all came from the smallest steps of obedience. So I got her number, and a week before I was getting out, I called her and I said, I'm getting out and I'm scared. I have nowhere to go. I don't know what to do. And she gave me instruction on what to do, and I did it because I was out of ideas, and it was a great place to be. It was where God always wanted me, and I'm, I get upset at myself sometimes that I waited so long to surrender, because I'm like, to me, the victory was in the battle, but with God, it's the complete opposite. The victory is in the surrender. It's when I'm weak that He's strong. And I never really understood that until I understood it. You never judge someone from their choices until you've looked at their options. And God has really brought that forth in me as well with others. So I end up getting out. Of course, there's no coincidences in God's world. I end up on Reset's porch for a cookout the day that I get released from jail. Didn't know it was Reset's porch. And next thing I know, they're like, yeah, they have a women's house. Thus, I moved into the house, became the house manager there eventually. I stayed there for 19 months. It's been such a blessing in my life. I've had great Christian women and friends that have just taught me to be me, to be who God called me to be from the very beginning. I didn't know her. I didn't know how to be her. And I definitely didn't know how to be successful. And I didn't know what that even meant or what that looked like. But I seen people happy, and I seen people genuinely being themselves and being selfless. And when God said, see that, I looked at that. And when God said, hear that, I heard that. And when He said, write that down, I wrote that down. And when He said, talk to them, pray with them, I started listening and those little acts of obedience. And I started making great connections with women who I just adore, and they love me and I just love them. And I was built for this purpose right here, to share my testimony with the world in hopes that someone else can hear that and say that if God can do that for her, if God can take her and clean her up, if God can use her, He can use me too. If God can do it for her, He can do it for me. And God has made it very clear that I'm to share that with the world, that I'm to let everybody know that God is no respecter of persons, and what He does for one, He will do for all. And He has given me more than I have to remind myself every day. God, if you give me nothing else, I have everything I have prayed for. I'm not going to say that this journey has been easy. I just recently celebrated 2 years honest recovery, and it feels amazing. I'm no longer sitting on my hands. God has healed me and delivered me from addiction and alcoholism. I have been set free. I am a grateful recovering alcoholic addict. I will always share that with anyone that ever wants to know the truth. But I do believe that Jesus Christ can set you free because He did it for me. I have a great job. I have a church family. I volunteer. I help the community. But most of all, I'm a willing vessel. Whether I'm in the grocery aisle at Kroger, at the workplace, in the parking lot, I'm obedient to the Lord. I can hear his voice clearly. And when he tells me to love on another, I love on them. And that doesn't mean I'm preaching. Sometimes it's just by an act of kindness. Sometimes it's just by a simple compliment, holding the door, whatever it may be. God will use it. We don't always understand because we're not supposed to. If we understood it all, we would never need him. But the life that God has given me is amazing. I don't deserve it. I don't. None of us do. But he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him with their heart. I'm not going to say these last couple of years have been easy. I've yet to get custody of my children back. I haven't seen them in 4 years. And that has not been easy. Because God knows my heart and that I want those kids in my life. I love them. But I am faithfully waiting for God to restore my family on his terms. I have finally came to a place of acceptance that because of my choices, my children are with family. I remember when God gave me the clarity of my selfishness when I thought I deserved my kids back. And he says, you're hurting. How do you think they feel? You know, so many times I'd use that for an excuse to run and get high or get drunk or, give up, give in because my kids weren't back and I hadn't. Don't you see me, God? Don't you see me? He so clearly said, I see you. But do you see your children? They deserve the stable home that they're in. They deserve to have the life that you couldn't give them at that time. I will restore your family in my time. I have healed, and I am working on forgiving myself for that. And I do know, and I stand on God's promise and his faith that he will one day restore my children, my 3 beautiful daughters to me. Until then, he's still working on me. And that's okay. I didn't get to the place I was at overnight. I can't get it all back in a year or 2 years or even maybe 5. But he's working on me and I'm letting him. For the first time in my life, I am inviting him in to do the work that should have been done so long ago in my heart. I don't believe that life is so much about creating a new person. I think it's about unlearning the person the world has told me to be. That's where the true healing starts. Once I start unlearning those things and knowing that that was never meant for me in the first place, then I can start allowing the true me to spring forth. The woman God has made me to be, the lady God has made me to be. I'm so grateful that God chose to show me who I really was that day in that jail cell. And I was so grateful that I did not like what I see. Because I look in the mirror every day and I know that there is a God who died just for me. He died for me. He loves me. I am a daughter of the King. And that is a beautiful feeling. It is a long, hard process. It is not easy, but it is worth it. And we are all one choice away, one surrender away from a completely different life. And if you've tried everything else, I suggest you give God a try so he can blow your mind too.